Don't bring your full self here unless it's tidy. Honestly, it starts to sound a lot like tone policing. Hey family, and welcome back to Vibe Check. Today's conversation goes a little bit deeper. We are going to be talking about spiritual bypassing. We're going to be talking about the pressure to perform positivity. We're going to be talking about the ways that wellness culture sometimes asks us to be palatable instead of whole. And we're going to be getting into some real discussion about collective grief and rage and liberation and why being real is not a sign of not being enlightened, but it is a sacred act of resistance. So this one is really for anyone who's been made to feel like their feelings are inconvenient or too raw or too loud or too much. If you've been feeling a lot and it's like the world or even people around you have made you feel like your feelings are just not high vibe enough, I really want you to stick around today because I feel like there's a lot here for you. But here's where I'm at this week. There is a lot moving right now. As I've been talking about the past couple of weeks, there's a lot moving collectively, there's a lot moving cosmically, there's a lot moving personally, and I think we're definitely still feeling the weight of eclipse season, right? We are also moving through shifts that, sorry, Gaia's here playing with stuff. We are also moving through shifts that we may not even have the language for yet. And in the midst of all this real and valid intensity, I keep noticing this push from a very particular segment of the spiritual community to just stay positive. It's this well-meaning, but kind of heavy-handed urge to focus on the good, even when things are clearly falling apart. I mean, I feel like we're experiencing things in this lifetime that even our parents and our grandparents didn't. I am all for choosing joy. I think that joy is sacred. I think that joy is an act of resistance. But what I'm talking about today is something entirely different. I'm talking about the way that spiritual and wellness spaces, especially online, can pressure us to bypass what it is that we're really feeling in the name of being high vibrational. Even when what we're feeling is valid responses to what is happening around us right now. So where did this phrase even come from? High vibes only, good vibes only. It sounds harmless. It's cute. It's kind of like something you'd see maybe at the yoga studio. But underneath that aesthetic, there's a lot going on, right? So I actually did some research. I hit up Google and I was like, give me some context. And I learned that the word vibe, which originally came from the word vibration, as in frequency and resonance, its earliest uses actually trace back to the vibraphone, which is an instrument that literally vibrates to create sound. Over time, vibe became slang, especially in Black music circles, for someone's energy, their aura, the way they carry themselves, or like the emotional current that they carry. By the time that the Beach Boys dropped Good Vibrations in 1966, the term had entered mainstream culture. By the 1970s, as astrology and metaphysics and Eastern philosophy started making their way into New Age and wellness spaces, vibes became shorthand for spiritual frequency, for how in tune somebody was with love and light and their higher consciousness. I think the original intention behind good vibes only and high vibes only wasn't inherently bad. I think it was about discernment. I think it was about protecting your peace. I think it was about being mindful of the energy that you take in and give out. But somewhere along the way, it shifted. And what started as an invitation, I think, became a demand or a lifestyle or a performance even. I think that's more so what I'm getting at. High vibes only stopped being about awareness and kind of more so about avoidance in a way. We kind of started using it to shut down anything that made us uncomfortable, to police how people showed up in their full humanity, and to filter out anything that isn't cheerful or polished colonialism, right? Don't bring your grief here. Don't make us uncomfortable with your anger. Don't be too real. Don't be too raw. Don't be too emotional. Before we knew it, I think that's something that was meant to free us and to help us tune into deeper alignment kind of became became this thing that was being used to shame people into silence. I think what's important to remember here, especially for those of us on a spiritual journey, not all things that feel low are low vibrational. Sometimes it's just truth. Sometimes it's pain that needs to be witnessed. Sometimes it is grief asking for space to be seen and to be held and to be acknowledged. When we shame those feelings in the name of good vibes, we don't actually heal. We're kind of just burying the parts of ourselves that don't fit the performance that's being asked of us. And the thing is, it doesn't affect all of us equally, because if you're Black, if you are queer, if you are trans, if you are neurodivergent, if you are disabled, if you are poor, if you are any identity that the world has tried to silence or flatten or make invisible, then you've probably been told at some point to just focus on the positive, when what you really needed was space, whether that's space to grieve or to rage or to tell the truth about what it means to live in a world that doesn't always see or honor your full humanity. I think that's where high vibes only culture becomes especially dangerous, because it doesn't just ignore the pain, but it also erases it. It dismisses the lived realities of people who don't get to bypass the things that are hard for them. People who can't just manifest their way out of systemic harm. Honestly, it starts to sound a lot like tone policing, and it's just wrapped in sage smoke and flowy pastel fabrics. It starts to mirror the respectability politics, just with affirmations and sound baths layered on top. You know what I mean? And it also starts to say, don't bring your full self here unless it's tidy. Don't bring your full self here unless it's healed and it's smiling and joyful all the time. That is very much spiritual gaslighting, because being spiritual doesn't mean that you're always calm or collected. And I kind of touched upon this a little bit in a previous vibe check, the one about why dysregulation is actually necessary. You can check that out if you haven't seen it. But being spiritual doesn't mean that you're always calm or collected. It doesn't mean that you're always regulated. It doesn't necessarily mean that you rise above injustice by suppressing your anger or silencing your grief. It means that you let humanity be a part of your practice. And for those of us who live at the intersections, for those of us who live in bodies and identities that this world has tried to legislate or demonize or erase, our grief is sacred. Our anger is sacred. Our loud and inconvenient and unfiltered truths are sacred, because healing is not always soft. Sometimes it's protest. Sometimes it's screaming into a pillow or weeping in the bathtub or choosing to rest when capitalism wants you to grind. Sometimes healing looks like allowing yourself to feel it all so that you don't have to carry it alone. Because we don't heal by denying what hurts. We heal by making space for what's real. And that includes the parts of us that this world doesn't always want to hold. I remember a few years ago, I was a part of a coaching program. And on the surface, it looks like everything that I wanted. It had community, it had wisdom, it had deep healing work. And to be clear, there was wisdom shared. There were tools and teachings that genuinely helped me grow and to even become the person sitting in front of this camera speaking to you right now. But there was also something that sat very uncomfortably in the background the entire time. I started to notice that whenever something heavy happened in the world, there was silence. There was no acknowledgement. There was no check-in. There was no space held for the people in the room who were directly affected. And it kind of felt like there was this unspoken rule that the collective grief we were carrying had no place there. That naming the weight of the world would lower the frequency. And while I don't think this was necessarily intentional, I remember thinking, how are we talking about healing but not talking about this? How can we speak about liberation without acknowledging the systems that actively harm so many of us, including the folks in that room? And so because of that, I didn't always feel like there was space to bring my full self, my sadness or my queerness or my Blackness, my exhaustion as a Black woman, trying to stay afloat in a world that so often feels like it's not built for me. And so, like many of us do, I think, I started muting myself myself to match the tone of the room. I would shrink myself in the back in conversations. I'd censor my questions or water them down. I would dress up my truth in softer language so that it wouldn't feel too disruptive, because being too real often felt like a risk. Like if I spoke from the rawness of what I was actually holding, then I would ruin the vibe, so to speak. But over time, and honestly through a lot of unlearning, I started to realize something really important, which was that the vibe that doesn't have space for my truth actually isn't one I really want to be a part of. You know what I mean? Like if my pain is seen as a problem, then that to me is not peace. If my full humanity is too disruptive, then that's not a healing space. My healing is not too much. My truth is not too much. My feelings are not an inconvenience. And if a space asks you to leave your grief or your rage or your complexity at the door, it's not a spiritual space. It's a performance. Real healing is raw and it's layered and it's beautiful and it's so deeply human. You deserve to be met in that fullness. You deserve to be met in the entirety of who you are and not just the parts that are easy to digest. I think the thing that we don't talk about enough is the fact that this whole high vibes only approach doesn't just feel bad, but it really does harm. And while it might wear a smiley face and wear the love and light language, underneath it can really just become a form of emotional repression and oppression, honestly. It teaches us, especially those of us who are already carrying so much, that our pain is a problem. And it isolates us when we're already in pain. It makes us question whether our sadness maybe is a failure of our spirituality. It tells us often subtly that unless we're glowing with positivity and ease, then we must not be doing it right. And I want you to know that grief is not a glitch in your growth. Rage is not a detour from your healing. As a matter of fact, it's a part of your healing. That transmutation is so crucial to the healing. I think when we try to bypass those emotions, when we try to pretend that they don't exist or to stuff them down in favor of polished positivity, we delay our healing. And what we don't feel, it doesn't just disappear. It's just going to end up resurfacing in more painful ways. We also internalize shame for being human. And we start to believe that sadness and anger and confusion and exhaustion are somehow signs of spiritual weakness instead of valid parts of the process. This is how high vibes culture gaslights our nervous system. It says, you're welcome here if you're easy to be around. It tells people who are actively grieving or processing trauma or navigating systemic harm that they have to perform wellness in order to belong. And that's not healing. That is pretending. And healing that only makes room for light without honoring the dark will always be incomplete. Our ancestors knew this. They wailed together, they sang grief songs, they held ceremonies that made space for release and not just resilience. And they knew that mourning was a form of medicine. They knew that naming the wound was a part of the ritual. They knew that your tears are sacred too. Many of us were taught that being emotional made us weak, and that our pain was inconvenient, and that our messiness was something to hide. And hello, shout out to colonization. Colonization is what stripped that from us. And it criminalized our rituals, and it renamed and demonized the gods and the figures that we worshipped. And it told us that silence and stoicism were strength. And yet, what if the most spiritual thing that you can do is feel deeply? What if telling your truth about your pain is what opens the door to your liberation? What if your rage and your grief and your tenderness, what if all of that is a part of your power? You don't have to be cheerful to be spiritual. You don't have to be digestible to be divine. You don't have to shrink your truth to be seen as healed. And being real doesn't mean that you're low vibrational. It means that you're alive. So let this be your permission slip to cry, to grieve, to yell, to dance, to laugh in the middle of it all, whatever you need to do, and to do it all without apology, because that is healing too, and it is more than okay. So instead of high vibes only, what if we practice something more honest? What if we practice something more whole? What if we made space for the both and? What if we made space for joy and grief, for gratitude and anger, for ease and tension? You get to bring your full self to your healing. There is room for both your softness and your fire. There is room for your becoming. We don't need more performance. In this social media world, we don't need more performance. We need presence. We need community that honors complexity. We need spiritual practices that don't silence our pain, but walk with us through it. Your truth is valid, and you don't need to bypass your humanity to be held by the divine. I want you to know that this space, this channel, it is here to hold the full spectrum of who you are and your experiences. So take what you need from today's conversation, and I invite you to just reflect, breathe, journal, cry if you need to, and know that you are not broken for feeling deeply. You are simply human, and you don't have to force joy to be worthy of healing. You get to be real, and that's enough. So let's just take a moment to take a breath together. So if it feels good wherever you are, maybe you just gently close your eyes. Take a deep breath in. And exhale. Just allow that truth to land tenderly in your body. You are allowed to feel it all. You are allowed to bring your full self to this journey. And you can trust that you are not alone in it. Take one more deep breath in. And with the next exhale, just slowly open your eyes. So let's talk in the comments. Let me know how this message resonated with you today, and feel free to share the thing that resonated with you the most. If you're not already, I invite you to subscribe and keep this conversation going. And until next time, take care of yourself, and I'll see you in the next vibe check, love. Bye, guys.